Hey everybody, hope everyone's having a great day out there. I have a short video today that I wanted to make for YouTube, particularly about knife scales and making knife scales for custom knives or existing knives. It's one of those things where it's not super complicated, it's just a bit time consuming, and it takes a really good eye for detail to some extent. Thankfully, many of my customers are also craftsmen, so you kind of get that. But to those who aren't really experienced with things like that, it would probably be a pretty serious challenge. It may be a challenge anyway, depending on your skill level and attention for detail. I know some people have a ridiculous eye, and some people, you know, they go and they hang a picture on the wall and it's freaking 3/8 of an inch lower on the other side and they can't see it. So it just comes down to, I guess, your experience level, your attention to detail. And ultimately, I think it boils down to how much you give a shit, because I get a distinct vibe a lot of times with, you know, just people in day-to-day life, that it's like, you know, it's not that you can't do this, it's that you don't give a shit about doing this. And as a matter of fact, not only do you not give a shit, you just want somebody to do it for you. So that's really common in the world today. So if you're that kind of person, maybe don't make knife scales. Do something else with your time, I guess. I don't know. Play video games. Do something. But this may not be for everybody. Long story short, now to get back on track, because, you know, I should have been a radio host, actually, because if I go into something scripted, it just doesn't work. If there's no script, I can just go forever. Like, I could sit there and ramble for 8 hours. So, you know, I always thought maybe radio host could have been my true calling. I don't know. I've had a lot of people tell me that. Believe it or not, I'm actually a very quiet person. I don't talk much. I'm pretty quiet, it's not very social. I just have other stuff to do for the most part. I've never really understood socializing all that much. I think a lot of people need to be social for whatever reason, and that's not how I am, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, back to the knife scales once again. This is a really pretty knife scale I'm working on. This one's Walnut, and it's pretty close to finished. I mean, we're getting there. I actually, when I was test fitting everything up on the knife that I have right here, this is a different style than the last one that we saw, and it's also CPM 20CV. But when I was fitting this up on there, it reminded me of a knife set I saw years ago, and it gave me a flashback. It was just because the walnut looks similar, you know, similar grain, and it was a case knife set that I saw in the hardware store. And this was back before I was even making tools, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I didn't know Case made kitchen knife sets, and it was actually really affordable for the most part. And Case tends to do pretty good for the most part. Like, they're not setting any records with their steel performance or anything, but like, they've been around forever, so they, you know, they do it right for the most part for general use little pocket knives and stuff. But I haven't tested their actual kitchen knives and things like that. But anyway, it reminded me of that, because the look of walnut for handle scales is actually really nice. And for chisel handles, it's not my first pick, because it tends to be softer, and as we all know, like, chisel handles get beat up a bit. And even with the socket tang design, it doesn't really matter, because the socket's on there, and the harder you hit it, the harder it's going to compress that socket, the harder it's going to squeeze down on the tang, and it's not like you're going to have a failure. You theoretically should be able to just beat on those to oblivion, even in walnut, and not have a problem. And walnut's one of those materials that doesn't stabilize super well either, for whatever reason. I think it's that the grain isn't as fine as maple. Like, you get a good piece of maple and you stabilize it, it soaks it up like a sponge, and it holds it. Like, I have some stabilized maple here for a set, and the cool thing is that I have found with maple some pretty blanks. I found with maple, when it comes to making tools, it does not matter whatsoever as long as you're stabilizing it. It doesn't matter whatsoever if it's soft maple or hard maple, it doesn't matter. Even soft maple will hold so much resin that I would bet money on the fact that soft maple, after stabilization the way that I do it, would outperform hard maple stabilized the same way, because it just holds so much resin. These things turn out so dense. Like, you can put a piece of soft maple in the resin, and mind you, you have to do it right, which can sometimes take a couple of days. You see those YouTube videos where people are like, you put it in there, you kick on the pump until the bubbles roughly stop, and then you whatever and take it out. That's not gonna work. Like, you're gonna have almost no resin in that piece of material. I don't care. I daisy chain vacuum pumps together because one vacuum pump still doesn't pull enough. So I run multiple on one vacuum chamber, and still it can take me, with the pumps running to fully evacuate the air, a couple hours. And even at that point, you want to leave it under vacuum for at least overnight. Like, at least overnight, with all of that pulled out, because the resin is going to be soaking and penetrating into the wood, even with the vacuum pull. So the thing, I'll just leave it until I need them. I will start blanks at least the day before, a couple days before I need them, and I'll leave them. I've had some in there that stay in there for 3 days, 4 days. I have some, most of the time, if I leave them under vacuum overnight, and I've, done them the afternoon before, pulled all the air out, give them some time, wait overnight. I'll come in the morning, first thing I'll do, I'll let atmospheric pressure back into the chamber, and I'll let it sit for a couple hours. And you pull those blanks out, 9 times out of 10, they're going to just be sunk on the bottom, and they're not going to go anywhere. Like, you can always tell if you take whatever you're weighting it down with and the blanks just go and they float back up. No, that's not good. They have to sink. And sometimes that procedure overnight, it's not enough even. Like, I'll come out in the morning, I'll have 4 blanks in there, I'll lift the thing up, and one of the blanks will float up. So you know what I do? Add in X amount more blanks, however many I'm gonna do in the next batch, weight it back down, run through the same procedure again. And eventually, it's going to sink or come so freaking close to it that it's just completely full of resin. That's maple though. Walnut won't do that. It does not matter. I could leave walnut in that vacuum chamber for 16 years and it's not going to sink. Maybe not 16 years, but I've left it in there for days and days and days and days. And then when you go to heat cure it, the resin runs right out. Like, a good percentage of what it held just runs right out. I don't know if it's that it's more resinous, which it probably is, but I mean, walnut doesn't seem like a resinous wood. I'm not the greatest wood expert. I mean, so many of my customers have a more advanced knowledge of wood than I do, so you let me know, is walnut considered resinous? Like, it doesn't seem like maple is, but I do know the grain is larger on walnut. And that's just obvious when you're looking at it, that the grain is more coarse. And that's the only thing I can really attribute this to, is that it just runs out of the grain more easily. It doesn't absorb it quite as well. So anyway, walnut for many applications is not as durable as many other things. For me, the optimal knife handle for a chef's knife, kitchen knife, any kind of knife, hunting knife, anything like that, would be G10 or carbon fiber, which I can do both. I can even do titanium scales. I can do all of those. But a lot of people really like the wood, the feel of the wood, and I'm more like a metal guy, advanced metallurgy guy, so mine doesn't really have to have wood scales. I like them. I have a number of my stuff that have wood scales, but I ended up switching everything to G10 for the most part, just because it's so durable. It's impervious to everything. G10's incredible, and it's more like a super high density fiberglass. It's not plastic. It's nothing like plastic for the most part as far as working with it. Anyway, so that's my spiel here on Walnut, is what I think of it in terms for, you know, the use in tool handles and things like that. It's beautiful. It is relatively durable, but it's not going to be the most durable thing you can get. If you like the aesthetics of Walnut, by all means, Walnut all of your stuff to the moon and back. I will make Walnut handles all day long. People love Walnut, and that's cool. I love it too aesthetically. Now, for my personal chef's knife that I'm making at some point, I did make a blade for it in this batch because I was running off so many blades. I made an extra for me, and I made an extra for my mom and for her Christmas present. And obviously, because the whole point of this, going back 8 years to this, was I just wanted a chef's knife that holds a freaking edge in CPM 20 CV that I can use. And so, yeah, I ran myself off one too. And it is right here. Just heat treated and hanging out. So for my knife, it's going to get the stone scales, white turquoise, and so is my mom's. I'm going to learn how to work with stone with that eventually. I have a number of things to get done first. But as far as making the scales go, doesn't matter what you're working with. G10's even the same way. It's just a little different to work with. But you have to essentially, what I like to do is take the blank, which would be like this right here. Once this is finish ground, you would want to finish grind this completely to get it like this, which that is complete and ready for scales. That's the one I'm working on. Same knife. But once it's finished ground and it's in that state, you have your handle scales like this. You want them to be perfectly even in terms of flatness, and you want them to be the same thickness. Otherwise, it's just going to look ridiculous. So what I like to do is lay it out however it needs to sit. That way it's fully, this scale was not made for this type of handle. It was made for the other type. I'm just using it as an example. But you want to get it centered like so. That way you have excess material all around. And then you can take a C-clamp. I use ones with the rubber on it for this in particular. That way I don't damage the wood. If you use a regular little C-clamp, I have damaged scales before and had to replace them. So, and it doesn't need clamped super tight. You're starting with this one here. What I like to do, if possible, because this makes it to where undoubtedly there's no screwing up with this. Let me see if I have it right here. Is I use the tap itself that I tapped those holes with. Those get drilled and tapped before heat treatment. Do not ever try to drill and tap a super steel CPM steel after you've heat treated it, unless you have carbide and you're willing to still destroy them, because it's really hard, and carbide, it'll do all right for a while, but they break so easy. Carbide drill bits, carbide taps, like especially since you need a lot of force to tap a CPM super steel, the amount of force you generate can easily break carbide. It's doable. I've done it a lot. I've accidentally forgot to drill holes before and had to carbide drill and tap things. It's doable. But just remember, if you're gonna ever heat treat a blade, do that before. But I'll take the tap like that, put it in the hole, spin it in the threads until the point of the tap makes a mark. It'll put a little dimple there. And then you go to the other hole that you want to go in. Normally I use the two outside holes. The two outside holes for, I consider the one that would go here, the front scale. So I'll use the two for the presentation side. I know it's the same on both sides, but if you're looking at the knife that way, I consider the left-hand side to be the front of the knife. It's just how my brain works. I don't know why, but that's the front to me. And I even mark front, rear. There's no front and rear. It's just my own methodology. But you get your dimple there, which, like I said, the 2 outside holes, this would be the rear, so you would want the 2 inside holes. You would go and turn that until you make a dimple, and then go over here, turn that until you make a dimple, right? And then once you do that, what I do, and this is the tricky part because this takes some feel, is I will loosen the clamp, and you want to be very careful not to move the scale on the bottom, just to make it easy. That way everything flows easily when you go to do this part. I will take it like this, holding it down, still not moving, set the other scale on top of it, lined up evenly with the other scale, and then put force down on it, and then take this one off, and then get the clamp and clamp it down without moving. And then same thing, that would be the presentation side. So I would take the tap and I would dimple the outside holes. Now you have exactly where your holes need to be for both of your scales. And if you do it this way, you will never screw up. Unless you move it, you'll never screw up. And they are just absolutely freaking utterly dead on. And I've never had one even be like they're so dead on, it's like maybe like 1,000th or 2 at the worst. And when you're working with G10 or something like that, you will definitely notice if it's a little bit off because it's so hard. Wood has give. G10 doesn't have that kind of give. But after that, I have the blank with the dimples, and this is where I kind of have a little bit of an advantage over a lot of woodworkers, being that I have machining tools. I'll go and I put this in my mill vise with the parallels like this, with this just sticking out of the top, tighten it up, and I'll use my milling machine to get the drill bit absolutely dead center, and then come over here to the next one, get it absolutely dead center, drill a hole in that one, throw my scale on the floor, and then you have the holes. And then you got to remember the dimpled side was up against the knife. So to countersink, which these are flat bottomed, those are just flat bottomed holes. So to countersink it, let's say you drilled your holes, this was up against the inside of the knife, you have to flip it. And then I put it back in the mill vise and I align the drill bit exactly dead center with that hole. I run the bit through it to make sure it's, within a couple of thousandths, and then I just use a really sharp 3/8 end mill and to 60 thousandths. Then I go over here to 60 thousandths, same exact procedure. Now at that point, get your bolts. I use stainless steel hardware for these, and then just bolt them on. And you have the handle scales that are on the knife lined up, good to go. From that point, stock removal. I go to my bandsaw, and be careful not to wreck your bandsaw into this, because in this state right here, that's hardened steel. The tiny, and I use those Timberwolf Swedish steel blades, and like the really like low tooth count. So like we're talking like milling wood kind of thing, just giant teeth. The most giant I can get, and I barely ever have a fine blade on my bandsaw. I normally just rip stuff, and so I use that for this. And ask me how I know this. If you even so much as just touch, and we're talking get into it 1,000th of an inch, just touch that blade it's done. It's never gonna, you might be able to cut somewhat, but it's gonna just burn wood. And I mean, touching it so lightly, so intermittently, that you can't even tell the steel was touched. That blade will be trash. And that sucks, because those Timberwolf blades are nice. And for me, I resharpen my bandsaw blades. I sharpen pretty much everything. So I'll run a bandsaw blade for years. I have a number of them that hang over my bench right there, and when one's dull, I have all different ones, but I actually just had to sharpen one this morning. They're not all that hard to sharpen, especially with the really low tooth count where it's like 3 teeth per inch. You can go around a bandsaw blade pretty quick and sharpen them. maybe like 20-30 minutes, and it's like new for however long. But don't touch the blade to that. You'll have, you know, you'll have a bad day. It'll at least waste a half hour of your day if you sharpen your bandsaw blades. So from that point, you want to rough out as much of the material as you can. Then you actually have to machine sand all of this to get it to contour exactly the way you want it. Don't, when you're sanding that excess material off, depending on what you do, like I'll drum sand in and around there. A lot of that's belt sanded, but don't, especially like drum sanding, belt sanding, anything like that, you want to make sure to go into it parallel, because if you go into it like this, it's just gonna, your scales are gonna be uneven, and that's not good. So you definitely don't want that. It's intricate. It's an intricate process, but we haven't even got to the intricate part yet. So now you have them all contoured and they're on your handle and you're good to go for the most part. But then you're left with these really square, blocky, that can't be a knife handle. I've seen people make knives and it's like they just knock off that corner. It's like, here's your knife. It's like, that'd be the most uncomfortable, non-ergonomic knife on the face of the planet to use. I see a lot of knife scales that people like custom knife makers and stuff make, and it's like, man, you see some really good ones and then you see some really like kindergartner, like this looks kindergartner anyway. Yeah, you know, no hate here. We've all started out before. I've not, you know, I've definitely sucked at things many times in my life, so I know what it's like. But next thing I do is I work around the outside, like with this, to, I'll actually get this one because this is a better example. This has a 45-degree bevel on it, and that's drum sanded, and you have to do that by hand and make sure it's all really even. And then I'll go around and just belt sand that bevel to match, and then belt sand a 45-degree bevel back here, and then you have to hand, like, belt sand a contour on that to your liking. And this is where it pretty much is by hand from here on out. It's by hand with sandpaper and everything, every contour you want to make sure, let me take the camera down a little bit, that way you can see. You want to make sure that there's no sharp edges. Like, you'll see how there's a 45-degree, I don't know if you can see the sharp edges there, but you don't want that. So the first thing you want to do is work by knocking off the sharper corners. And once you've knocked the sharp corners off, and you want to keep this as even as humanly possible when you're doing this. And this is really hard to do on camera, but I'm doing my best. This isn't something I've ever... And it just takes by eye. You have to get the contour the way you want it and get it to flow with, because this is flat. The bottom of that's flat, so you have to really get it to flow the way you want it to. You don't want anything to feel harsh. And for some reason, it always seems like, not for some reason, because technically you think about it, when you're sanding that bevel inside of there, right here, you're sanding with the grain. Right there, you're sanding across the grain. So you may be sanding everything evenly, and you're like, well, why is there so much material gone here? And then over here, I barely have sanded anything off. Well, technically that's end grain you're sanding there. So the end grain takes a little bit more. Then once you've knocked off that first sharp corner, I just work my way upward to make sure this sharp corner is knocked off. So you still want a clean line there though. You want a clean line, but you don't want a sharp corner, if that makes any sense. Hopefully my OCD was on display there. You want a clean line, but not a sharp corner, if that makes any sense. I'm sure everybody knows what I mean. Somewhere between a clean line, but not feeling harsh. And you want everything to be even. I'll tell you, there's a reason why my knives aren't cheap. And like I said, they're pretty fairly priced for what they are, because every aspect of this process is time consuming. And to have, you know, an experienced craftsman spend all afternoon sitting there and intricately making handle scales for your knife by hand, literally hand sanding it to make sure the contours are flawless, that shouldn't be cheap. I don't want to live in the world where that is cheap, because I really value people's skills and abilities. I always have really appreciated seeing the skills of others. That's why I say, like, sometimes I get to see the stuff that my customers make. They'll send me pictures of things that they made with their chisels, and my immediate thought is like, wow, like, I'm nothing. I just assemble stuff is what it feels like compared to the artwork that so many people do. You know, when I think of, and that's just the way I am. When I look at my ability to craft things, I don't think of, you know, oh, this is, you know, skilled for being what it is. I think of guys like F.P. Journe. If you're not familiar with F.P. Journe, the Swiss watchmaker, that's a craftsman. I'm not even so much a splinter in that guy's pinky. Like, the amount of the skill, you know, I can aspire to have a level of intricacy that rivals even a tenth of that man's genius. But I know where I stand in the world, because the world contains people like that, and people like that make me look like a non-entity. So I just really appreciate skill. It's something that, and that's just part of how I was raised. Was always stressed, be able to do things. And I think a lot of people look at asking for help with things as a first line of defense rather than a last resort. That's something that I actually just thought up the other day. I was like, if I have to ask for help with something, that's like my last resort. For a lot of people, it's their first line of defense. When something goes wrong, all they know how to do is pick up the phone and call somebody. They don't actually have the ambition, the drive, the knowledge to just be like, you know what, I can handle this. I may not know how to do it, but I'm going to figure it out. Which, by all means, if you have the finances to be able to call somebody to fix all your problems, bravo. Like, slow clap. Nothing wrong with that, because obviously you're good at other things. That's the way I look at it. But my life's not ever been that way. I have to, like, either figure out how to fix my problems or completely and utterly fail. So basically, I don't want to stand here and just sand this thing on camera all afternoon. Hopefully you have roughly the idea of what I'm talking about here, because I've already contoured quite a bit of this before we started, like I did the back here. So you can see, and I still have a ways to go, but you can see what I'm talking about, how it starts to take shape. Everything kind of starts to take shape. And then, from this point, I'll work upward in grits. This is 220 is generally where I start. And from there, I'll go up to a 320, which I have over there, but it's just a garnet 320 that I like to use on wood. From there, I'll go down to a 400, and then I'll end up finishing it somewhere close to 1,000 seems to be. It just depends on the wood. 600 to 1,000, something like that. So, you know, it just depends. You have to look at the wood. Harder woods seem like they need a lot finer finish to look good. But that's what it's all about. Using your hands, using your eyes, attention to detail, figuring things out. Even against all odds, you may have to figure something out. I believe in people. I've always been the type to believe in people and believe in people's abilities. And it's like I told my daughter the other day, I was like, I hope someday that you can believe in you as much as I believe in you. Like knowing how strong she is and knowing how much she's been through. It's like, I just hope like hell someday it clicks in her head and she realizes how strong she is and how capable. So hopefully that will come. Anyway, I could sit here and ramble all day. I'm not going to do that. I hope everybody learned something, a little bit of something today, or something was answered that maybe you didn't know. But let me, just for the sake of the camera, show you how easy these will bolt on and how flawlessly everything fits up. I'll slap a couple of bolts in here. And if you do purchase one of these knives, Andrew at KimmonsHandTools.com, they're 1/8 inch. You can just use an 1/8 inch hex key is all it takes to do these. And I do polish the hardware as well. These aren't polished yet. That's my one of the final things I do before putting a knife together. I buy stainless hardware. That's even the hardware is American made. I don't buy cheap Amazon hardware. I have my local hardware store. They get, I don't remember, I think from Midwest Fastener. A lot of their fasteners I really like, because if you try to order that same exact button head screw off of Amazon or something like that, the pictures will look all right. They'll show up and they look like crap. I have ordered so many fasteners off of Amazon to try and find, you know, a weird fastener that I can't get. And they look like crap. And I don't know, this must just be cheaply made Chinese fasteners or whatever. But anyway, I've had really good luck with Midwest fasteners, and I'm sure they're probably made in the US. They're not cheapies. These are 58 cents a piece, I think, for those, which for a fastener, a little tiny bolt, that's not super cheap. But make sure that's nice and tight, and you can see a kind of a sneak peek of what that's going to look like. And you see what I mean about how everything has to fit flawlessly. Everything has to fit and flow. You don't want to be able to feel this seam at all. Everything has to flow and come together. And this has many more grip progressions. And as I get down, like for this, once I get into the 320, that's when I'll really start using my eyes, because the 220, like this is just to knock that sharp corner off, just to get some flow. 320 is when it starts, the material will smooth out enough to where I can start seeing more, you know, flaw or imperfection, or where something needs ground down or sanded down a little bit more. It stands out more the finer in grit you get, because like like this, I sit there and I see none of that 45-degree little chamfer left at all. When I work down to 320 or 400, I guarantee you I will see a line pop out in a couple spots where it's like, that bevel's, the corner of that bevel's still full on there. So I'll have to go back to a coarser abrasive, knock down whatever spot needs knocked down, and then go back and work down in progression until that like harsh spot is out of it. And that's just how it goes. Anyway, if you're interested in custom chef's knives, this looks good in walnut. That looks super good in walnut. This is the first one I've ever done in walnut, so I'm happy. I'm actually really glad he did this, because something about it, walnut looks really freaking good on knives. I don't know what it is, but it just, the aesthetics of the walnut on there is just killer. And I know I might be crazy. I see things, maybe I'm colorblind, I don't know. But the walnut like has an element of green to it that pairs really well with this particular steel. And I might be nuts. I see colors weirdly, because 20 CV to me has a kind of the slightest goldish hue, kind of like how A2 has a bluish hue. 20 CV has like a goldish hue, and a steel like 01 tends to just be like super pure, and so it's just like all I see is silver. And 01 and what are the other, like the 1090 something series. It's like silver, but less silver, if that makes any sense. Anyway, this is just a really nice pairing, so I'm glad I got to see that. I'm pretty excited about that. It'll look really good when it's finished. Call me crazy, because I'm sitting here like, I've never looked at walnut and thought, tinge of green, maybe some tiniest bit of the light spectrum emitting green off of it. I don't know. I could be totally nuts, but compared to this steel, looking at it right here, especially in camera, it has like the slightest tinge of green. I don't know. Could totally be nuts. If I'm nuts, let me know. If you like the video, like it, because that helps. Because the YouTube algorithm, apparently, if the videos don't get many likes, they don't really put them out there. So, you know, if I get a couple hundred views and no likes, 2 likes, 3 likes, then YouTube just automatically assumes it was crap. And if it's crap, you know, don't like it. So just, you don't have to like it just to make me happy. If you like it though. So anyway, I hope you have a great day out there. And if you want knives, tools, anything like that, custom knives, if you have a design for a knife and want to send me a sketch of it, I can do that. Andrew at KimmonsHandTools.com. Send me an email and let's talk about it. Woodworking, tools, chisels, all that stuff. Let me know. Anyway, have a great day, and I will see you next time.